Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Kurt Thompson.
And my friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Hey, Kurt.
Hey, Pep. Good to be back in the recording studio with you.
Yes, it's great to be back. You know, I think we talked about this a little bit on the one of the last episodes. You know, at some point we just need to come on and turn the mics on right away before we even say hello and just let it roll, because our time that we get to spend together prior to this with Amy is just it's honestly it's experiencing a lot of what you're teaching. It's living it out. But I'm also very protective of that time too, and glad that we get to have a little private time before we turn the lights on.
Yeah, it's precious. It really is. I mean, Phyllis knows. She knows how much I look forward to Friday mornings recording and hanging out and really being known and being cared for, and I feel completely buoyed by it. You know, just completely like lifted and it's great. Yeah.
So today we are of course. Today we are working on season 4. I'm sorry, I should start over. We are working on episode 4 of season 6, and today we're going to be talking about right and wrong, being and knowing, and being and knowing and being.
Da 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 da.
Yeah, exactly. So I think probably to get us started, Kurt, maybe you could spend a little bit of time and just sort of touch base a little bit on a little bit of a review on how we got here, what we've talked about so far in these first 3 episodes.
Right. Well, the season the season title is The Beauty of Wisdom, and we're really focusing on this question of like, what does it mean for us to be people of wisdom, and acknowledging right from the beginning that we don't really know anybody who wouldn't want to be a person of wisdom. And so far, we've talked about how wisdom is something that we become. It's not just something that we acquire, it's something that we become. We would become people who make wise choices, who think wisely, who act wisely. And in the last 2 episodes, we've talked about the process of awareness, that we're kind of correlating wisdom with each of the domains of integration that we've talked about from interpersonal neurobiology, and how that's all sitting on the hard deck of Scripture and the presence and power of the Holy Spirit. And that when we become, we want to talk about wisdom begins with our being aware. And then that whole notion of consciousness, am I awake, alert, and attuned? I even know that my consciousness, though, is not the same as wisdom. Just because I am aware, the fact that I'm aware in and of itself is not to be wise. And then in our last episode, we talked about the wisdom of the body, that we sense things, that we feel things in the body, that we need to pay attention to what our body is telling us. And it's also easy for us to mistake wisdom for whatever I sense in my body, and therefore whatever it is that I want to do with my body. Whether that's to, speak to somebody harshly, I do that with my body, with my tone of voice, or whether I want to look at pornography, or I want to be sexually wandering into, I might want to do a whole range of different things with my body. My body might feel certain things, but just because I sense something or want to do something in my body, in and of itself does not mean that that's wisdom. And so we want to recognize and remind ourselves that all of this, my awareness, that first domain, am I aware, am I awake, alert, and attuned, and am I aware of my body, that all of that takes place in what we would call the real world. This world that we occupy, and the world that we people of faith believe that we're living in, this context is one in which wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. This is Proverbs chapter 3. This is Proverbs chapter 8. It's throughout the Proverbs. Wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, meaning I'm going to submit what I'm aware of. I'm going to submit my body to ask the question, what does it mean for me to be aware of these things in the presence of God and in the words that He is speaking to me? So even my awareness emerges in the context of others who are helping me to figure things out, right? When newborns come into the world, right? They're sensing things, imaging things, they're becoming increasingly conscious, but they're doing so in a world that other people occupy and are going to help them figure it out. I never acquire wisdom by myself. I am a necessary agent in that acquisition, but I'm not sufficient. I have to be actively seeking wisdom. I have to be curious about it, longing for it. I have to take action toward it. But I'm not going to figure all that out by myself. I need other people. This, what we might call, borrowing from our language of a triune God, we would say that there are triune requisites that we have for becoming people of wisdom. One is the presence and power of the Holy Spirit. As that Spirit revealing to us the words and body of Jesus. So the Spirit, this triune God, the Spirit is one element of that. The second element of that are the scriptures that we've talked about so far. And then there is the community in which we are embedded. These three features then help us. We need to see those as resources. And we might even say that part of that community includes the created order that God has provided for us, including these elements of neuroscience that we're learning about. And in this way of seeking out and paying attention to the wisdom of the mechanics of God's world, the neuroscience of God's world, in the context of the Spirit, the Scripture, and the body of Jesus, we become people of beauty and goodness. That's what wisdom is about. That's demonstrated by our living out, being the people of the fruit of the Spirit, that we live out the Sermon on the Mount. It's also our moving at God's pace. This is an important thing we've said in other seasons, that we are rhythmic people. Right? We have a heart rate, we have a pulmonary rate, we have a coming and going in our bodies and our gait. There are a whole range of ways that we are rhythmic people, and God moves at a certain rhythm. I find that God is often moving at a rhythm that's not quite as fast as I want Him to move, especially when it comes. Dude, the length of time that it takes for me to acquire wisdom, I don't know why I didn't just get an intravenous bolus of this when I was 18. Could you just hook me up to the IV?
I don't think the 18-year-old brain could handle that amount of wisdom.
My gracious. No. So I wish God would do this more quickly, but I think in God's pace, it means He's doing this thoroughly. He's going to take His time because He wants us to become people of wisdom. He doesn't just want us to have it.
Yeah, God is so much. To me, He's a God that's so much about the process. He doesn't want to cut. Right. There's no shortcuts. There's, unfortunately, at times. Yeah. It's so much about the process, and there's so much wisdom in the process, in this particular process of trying to gain wisdom. And yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We would also say that this means, if we're moving at God's pace, it gives us an opportunity to what I would say that we're living eternally. And what I mean by that, I'm thinking about Ecclesiastes chapter 3, where we read that all things are made beautiful in their time, for God has placed eternity in humankind's heart. And that word eternity, from a Hebrew standpoint, is not just a measurement of time, as we may have said here before. It is a measurement, it is a description of the quality of life that God lives. It is a measurement of depth. It is a measurement of the intensity of beauty, of goodness, of kindness, of love, joy, peace, patience, that he also is unwilling to foist upon us. I'd like to, I'd love to be a person who's only ever kind, who's only ever patient. And God's like, I'm all about that. So let's give you plenty of opportunity to practice becoming that. Like, I'm looking for the magic wand. I'm not looking for 2-a-day practices to have to get better at hitting my receiver on the out pattern.
You pray for patience. Doesn't it mean long suffering? I mean, it's. Why would we pray for patience?
So I don't pray for patience anymore. I don't pray for any of this stuff anymore. It's too likely that God will take me seriously.
Right.
He's like, but Kurt, you asked.
Right.
Yeah. And so this whole notion of living eternally, living like God lives, living as a embodied, like a body of wisdom, as we are becoming, just takes this time for us to be practicing this over and over and over again. And so it's that wisdom isn't just then a thing, it's a way in which we live. And I'm only able to do this contingently. I'm only able to do this because I'm looking to Jesus. I'm looking to my community. I'm looking to the scriptures. I am going to acquire it by being in difficult places that require me to, be in places where I don't know what to do necessarily, or I do know what to do and it's really hard to do. So I'm going to have to do it with the help of others. And in this way, we would say, like, at the end of the day, it's fashionable in our culture to talk about, well, how does one self-identify? The whole notion of, when we now come to, medical records, and it's now even fashionable in medical, when you're filling out your forms for your medical practice, say the sex that you were given, that you were basically given at birth, right? As if like, oh, now I have a choice to decide whatever that is, where everybody's going out of their way to make sure that nobody's going to make anybody be anything. You get to decide everything that you want to decide about you. And the reality is, like, that's just not the way the material world operates. It just doesn't operate that way. When I trip and fall down and break my wrist, I'm like, no, I don't want to identify as a guy who's got a broken wrist, but like the earth and the sidewalk and my shoes, like, I can't argue with that. It's pretty tough to do that. But this whole thing of, like, I want to become wise is really not just a function of, like, what can I do? It's really a question of who am I going to trust? Wisdom is primarily a feature of who am I trusting to help me discern what is true about who I am, what is true about the world. Not just what am I deciding is true about the world. This is Adam and Eve's issue, right? They decide they're going to take and decide what is right and wrong, as opposed they're going to trust the serpent rather than trusting God. It's not just that the woman decided all by herself. She decided to trust someone else rather than trusting God. So wisdom is a function of, at one level, asking the question, who are the people that I'm going to trust to help me understand what is true about the world? And then when it comes to interpersonal neurobiology, they can help us figure out the mechanics, but the mechanics don't decide what the meaning is of what wisdom is. I can know that I'm sensing my anxiety in my chest, but that does not tell me what should I then do about that. And even what I want to do, I might say, well, what I want to do is yell at you or yell at my kid. That's what I really want to do. But there might be yet another part of me that wants something different even beyond that. I want to parent well. There's the part of me that wants to parent well and wants to be gentle and wants in my response. But then there's the part of me that just wants to, yell at my kid. So who is going to help me discern, like, well, which of the proper responses is wise?
Right.
So who are we listening to that tells us who we are? So that's just a recap of what, as we're paying attention to wisdom. And today in particular, we're then moving to this next domain of how we become people of wisdom. And it's the wisdom of the horizontal domain of the mind. We talk about the right and left side of the brain. And we're just going to do a real quick run through, just a review of how that happens. First of all, we remember that when children are born, the right hemisphere of the brain tends to develop more quickly. The functions that it shows up, that it reveals, tend to happen more quickly. The left side of the brain comes online at about 18 to 24 months of age. That's when it starts to pick up speed and join in that process. And we also, Ian McGilchrist has this beautiful book, The Master and His Emissary, in which he talks about the fact that, the right and the left brain, there's actually at birth, the right and left hemispheres are both capable of doing the same things. They can do those things in the beginning. But at some point, you just begin to use certain parts of your brains in different ways, and they become kind of practiced into doing those things. So my language centers become practiced into doing certain things in my left brain, and my right brain has all these other things that it will start to do. And we start with this right hemisphere that, is the place where we have sensations and images and emotion, nonverbal cues, holistic mental activity. We walk into a room and the room just feels right, or I feel tension in the room, that sensation of what's happening here and now. That's largely coming out of my right hemisphere. A sense of timelessness. I'm in this podcast and having a great time, and I stop paying attention to time.
Right.
This present moment is like a right hemisphere is really kind of like more present and prominent in its activity in that moment. And then the right hemisphere also has an other important element, this what we call an internal map of the body. When we sense things literally in our gut, when I sense something in my chest, those sensations are all kind of running up the spinal cord, and they're running through the vagus nerve. They're running to my right hemisphere. And then we get to the left brain that starts to come online, 18 to 24 months of age, where I start to think about things. I have words that come to my mind. I put those words together, and they start to be linear in my thinking. See, spot, run. I don't know where that came from, although I do. It came from that book.
Harry, Dick, and Jane.
You're right. Yeah. And so then, hopefully, my linear progression becomes logical, right? I hope that this is how we get logical thinking, this sense of like we start to put things together and we start to make meaning. And we also include in that meaning literal meaning, this sense of like, could you please bring me 3 apples? Right. Or could you make me some applesauce?
Well, we know you can do that.
That's not code for something else. A literal rendering of could you bring me some applesauce is like, could you please bring me the applesauce out of the refrigerator? But then what we find is that like the way the brain works, we say it's bottom to top and right to left, this way in which I sense things in my body. It runs up to my right hemisphere where it mixes with my sensations and images and feelings and all the other stuff that's going on. And then it crosses the corpus callosum. It crosses that strip of tissue that connects these two halves. And then I am making sense of what I sense. Now, this is a sequence, but it's not a hierarchy necessarily. It's not like, well, one should be more important than the other. My literal thinking is more important than my code thinking or my felt sense of things. It's not that one's more important than the other. It is that they were designed to work contingently together. They depend on one another because first I sense things and then I make sense of what I've just sensed. Right? I see someone coming at me. I see their intention. And I read that and I feel that their intention. Is their intention one of joy, or is their intention one of distress or anger? And I'm very quickly making sense of that. I'm very quickly telling a story about that. And the story that I tell itself takes on life that circles back around and becomes something that I now sense. And so I'm thinking of that. I'm thinking of the infamous evening walking down the hallway in the hotel with me trying to stay upright because we're laughing so hard. And it's like you have this moment of humor that, catches you, and then you start to think about it, and the thinking about it doubles back and
Sure.
only accentuates what's happening, and I can't get down the hallway because this thing it just becomes like this vortex
Right. Right.
that I can't get out of the middle of. And this is what we do with joyful moments. It's also what we do with frightening moments.
Yeah.
How does wisdom come out of that space? We're going to get to that in just a moment. This whole notion then that we sense, especially like emotion, like we have, and this is where it becomes tricky and important. Like I can have certain emotion that we talk about, this thing called primary emotion that we sense in our body, that we are often sensing like in our bodies are picking up on things without us consciously being aware that it's happening. It's kind of like you and I are sitting here in our chairs, and as we're talking, we're not really paying attention to what we feel on our back or on our legs as we're sitting. We're not paying attention to that. We could if we wanted to, but we're not. But it doesn't mean that our brain isn't registering those sensations. It is, but we're turning our attention to something else. So there's a lot of emotional content that we might actually be sensing, but that we're not actually paying attention to. But when we start to, we discover, oh, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm joyful. These are things that we call categorical emotions. And what's so interesting is the primary emotion. Under certain circumstances, you and I might be in the same circumstance and have two very different responses to it in that same moment. But the way we express them, like we would say that by the time we get out and express something like my anger, my sadness, my joy, everybody in the world, this categorical emotion, everybody in the world, by the time we express it and know it, we all know what it's like to be angry. Whether I live here, whether I live in Sudan, I know we know what it means that we are angry. But it might get to us in different ways. And this is what is important because, for example, we can have things that we sense and image and feel, all that right hemispheric activity. But what is happening for me in a circumstance might be different than what's happening for you in that same circumstance. And if I'm not paying attention to you, I might start to assume things that you are feeling or thinking, or I'm going to start to imagine things. I'm making sense of what I'm sensing, but I might not actually be correct, right? If my wife speaks to me in a certain tone, I might tell a story. I'm making sense of that with my left brain, but the sense that I'm making may not actually be what's happening for her.
That's Brene Brown talks about how she says the story that she'll go to somebody and she'll say, the story that I'm telling myself right now is on a situation that, she's telling herself a story that's not the reality of what's going on at all in that other person. But the only way that you actually know is if you go to them and have the conversation about it, as opposed to just continuing to create these scenarios in your mind that,
Right.
what's happening.
Right. And so this brings us to this notion of context. And we bring this up because it's particularly true. When we talked earlier, we've said at the beginning episodes that one of the things that we're doing here is that we are leaning heavily on the scriptures. Mm-hmm. And we like to say, that, again, borrowing from the folks at the Bible Project.
Which, by the way, Nell and I have really started to get into, and we're doing.
Have you liked it?
Yeah. We started sort of an evening ritual where we're sitting down and we're doing one of the Bible studies. And yeah, it's really great. It's so easy to engage in, and the teachings are really good, and you get to hear different perspectives from different people, and it's been great. It's been great. Yeah.
So they talk about the Bible being, the scriptures are a God-human endeavor. It is a divine human endeavor that is an ancient, Jewish, messianic, meditative, wisdom literature. All those words are important. And one of the primary things that we think about when we think about ancient and Jewish, we're really talking about context. That when we come to the Bible, if we're not, it's like if you decided that you were going to go to Chad, the country of Chad, and you just thought, like, I'm just going to go there and live like I live in Northern Virginia. I think, like, that would be, not only would it be rude, but it would be, like, silly.
Right.
I would want to know everything I could possibly know about everything about Chad as I entered into it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we need to know about the scriptures, right? Wisdom is about knowing context. It is about understanding. If I'm going to seek wisdom from the scriptures, I can't just read it through the lens of a Westerner, my individualistic self. And
right. It's very much about knowing what you're bringing into it, the perspectives that you have from your modern day life living of what you're bringing into it and what actually who it was written
right
for and to, and yeah,
all those things are so important because, as it turns out, our posture towards scripture being like that is the same thing that we have to have in our posture toward other human beings.
One another. Yeah.
And in this way, the scriptures themselves, how they were written, how they were curated, how they were designed to be read, is the exact same. Like, it's a mirror image of, like, who we are as human beings. Like, we are designed to be read in our context. Even that English word context, the word the first half, con, is from the Latin together or with. I'm going to be with text. The word text in Latin is to weave. It's we are with the weaving. Now so I'm present to the creation of something, which is important. It's a movement. Like, it's not static. So even that person that I want to understand, the wisdom that I want to acquire, it's not like, oh, I now know, I know what it is, and that's what it is forever and ever. Amen. Like, I have to recognize there is a weaving process that is going on, and I want to understand you in that space as it is now. Tomorrow, next week, it will be different. I mean, who among us who's married doesn't know what this is like? That, like, oh, who knows? Like, my wife's like, oh my gosh, like, like, which part of you is who am I talking to now? Which one? I thought I was talking to, like, the adult Kurt, but can I see your driver's license? She's. Or do you have one?
You're getting carded in your own marriage.
It's right. That's right. So there's this movement that's taking place. And in this way, the scriptures are also reflections of this horizontal domain of wisdom, this sensing and making sense, this divine, human, ancient Jewish messianic literature. It's not static, it's living. And the other thing that it does is that the scriptures push against my need to know with certainty. And dude, like, I want to know with certainty. I just want to know it. I am not interested in wondering about things. I want to know. And if I can't know for sure, then I'm going to do everything I can to be absolutely certain, which is very different than learning to trust. As we were talking about earlier, I'm going to have to trust what I'm sensing, and I'm going to have to trust what I'm sensing in someone else. And the sense that I'm making with my logical, linear processing, which is necessary because I can't live or operate in the world if I can't logically make sense of things, but it's all grounded on this question of who am I trusting? Wisdom leads us to know, not with certainty, but with confidence in someone who will be faithful to me, no matter what happens. And we gain this practice of strengthening and becoming more resilient in our capacity to trust by our interactions with the scriptures, with with the body of Jesus, with God himself. And all of those things require great willingness for us to take risk and be intimate, which is not easy for us to do. Not easy for us to do.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's against wisdom.
Right.
like it goes, it's contrary to wisdom to be willing and jump into that vulnerable pool.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Right. Well, I think about, and that's just right, like right through. But jumping into the vulnerable pool, by naming what's happening in the room. I just want to say that, like, so to your point about Brene Brown's comment that, here's the story that's going. This is the story that I'm telling myself.
Yeah.
In that sense, we are saying that we're really bringing. We like to say in our work that we're moving from the imagination to the incarnation.
Yes.
What's actually happening between you and me right now, I'm going to name that and make it incarnate. So that we're not leaving it to other. I'm not leaving you to have to imagine what's actually going on in my head.
Yeah. I think I shared a story with you once before. I don't know if I shared it on the podcast or not, but I had, it was had just sort of started to develop some new friendships. This was out in California years ago. It was people that I was working with in the voiceover community. And we had a softball team. And there was one guy who I was working with quite a lot, and I was very fond of him. Witty, funny, really fun to be around, smart, really good at his job. And but it was a new relationship. We were just kind of getting to know one another, and we had a party after a softball game where we all got together at somebody's house, had like a picnic kind of thing, and there were a bunch of guys kind of razzing each other a little bit, and I said something and completely a joking manner, thinking that everybody was in on the joke in the room, and evidently he wasn't. And I didn't know. And the next day he called me up and
Dude.
he said something along the lines of, hey, I probably wouldn't be making this call if I didn't like you. He said, but you said something last night that really bothered me. And I want to clear the air, which we were able to have a great conversation, and we worked together for years and became really good friends. And it never would have happened had he just kept telling the story that he was telling himself about about a conversation that we had.
Right.
And I just had so much, just the fact that he came to me like that just gave me so much more respect for him.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
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 Well, that's, again, it's at some level, he's actually, in his logical mind, his thinking mind, he is actually paying attention to what he's sensing. I feel like he's being curious across the hemispheres, if you will. He's being curious about those things, and in so doing, is not just seeking wisdom by clearing things up with you, but he is being wisdom in that moment. And you can imagine that if he leads with, I'm doing this because I like you, that it creates space for you to say, oh, I'm not listening to a guy who's coming to me, with his Glock. I'm listening to a guy who's got feelings, but he's leading with what he wants. He's leading, telling that I want this relationship. And I think in many respects, so you have that moment, and then you see that moment leads to the possibility of creating beauty and goodness that is at a depth that you didn't have even before that little wrinkle.
Exactly right.
And that's the other thing that we would say, that this wisdom is about creating beauty and goodness. We said, as we said a couple episodes ago, it was in the beginning with God, and wisdom is what God calls forth, that begins the creative process on the first page of the Bible. That wisdom is an act of creating things of beauty and goodness at all times. And of course, what we know can happen is that trauma and shame tend to leave us either dominantly out of either in one hemisphere or another, depending upon how that trauma works itself out with us. And then I become more concerned with just being whoever I am. I'm more concerned about being right than being loving. So I know that I'm going to be certain. You said this, you said that. That's what you meant.
Right.
That's my left hemisphere just running with things as opposed to being curious about things. Or maybe my right hemisphere is in charge and I'm just kind of like a loose cannon. I'm not thinking logically at all. I'm just expressing my emotion all over creation, just being whoever I want to be. My friend Jeff Dudiak, who's a professor of philosophy at the King's University in Edmonton, he's done a lot of not just academic work, but really thoughtful work. He's working on a book project now about how he's tracking this arc of how we have come over the course of the last 500 years to move from in the West to move from a people of being a people of wisdom that valued wisdom to a people who valued knowledge, and now have become a people who value information, and that information on its own does nothing to create beauty and goodness in the world. That if you're going to do that in a sustainable fashion, you must be pursuing wisdom. And so we end up moving, when we don't address our trauma or our shame, we move further away from ourselves and from each other.
Makes sense.
And this leads us into this. I just want to talk about this artistic notion for the day. I have a friend. His name is Jeff Taylor, and he is a renowned accordionist and keyboardist. He's actually a multi-instrumentalist. He plays the mandolin. He plays the guitar. He plays lots of different things. He plays these it's not a piccolo. What's the
thing that's not a piccolo?
Yeah. Jeff's going to hear this and he's going to think, Kurt, we were just together last week. Anyway, Jeff is just a masterful musician, and he is part of, and I was with him at a retreat, he and a couple of other guys at a retreat last weekend, and much a member of this group called the Time Jumpers, which is this group of guys, not just guys, people, right, men and women who got together in Nashville and are just playing stuff together, and they are off the chain. A lot of it is bluegrass, but it's not only that, it's country.
Yeah, old time stuff. It's great. You sent a link to me this week, and I spent some time listening to it, and it's fantastic stuff. Vince Gill's involved, and it's a great, and they never know what they're going to play.
This is the thing.
Right?
They don't know what they're going to play, but they are looking and reading what the other people, and they often even talk about how on stages, they like smaller stages because they can be literally physically in closer proximity to one another, and they can look and sense each other's movements that much more. Like when they've played at the Ryman, which is a big stage, and they will they will bunch together. They don't spread out like they could. And this artistic expression to me represents these are people who are paying attention to what they're sensing. They're making sense by paying attention. They're bringing their conscious awareness into this place where they're paying attention to what they're sensing, and then they are going to do what they need to do in response contingently to what the next person beside them, what they're doing often. And to watch these guys, they get up, they just go, and at some point somebody starts to enter into a solo. And who knows who's going to be next? They might call it out like that all at once. And so my invitation is for us to, take a look, the Time Jumpers, take a look at that group. And especially Jeff is their accordionist. And so he'll stand out, but he's just fantastic. But it is a way for us it highlights this horizontal domain of how we have all these things that we sense, but then we are going to make sense. We're going to do something with that. In a way, though, that is creating beauty and goodness in that moment. And so for our application this week, we would say that we want to invite you each day to pay attention to a separate function of either the right or the left hemisphere of the brain. I want you to notice. Turn your conscious domain of your mind toward one of those functions. Notice your response to each or any of those functions that we've listed here, and what you tend to do in response as a result. And then I want you to just try this little exercise. Just imagine being present with Jesus. And you and Jesus together being curious about the meaning you're giving to whatever you're experiencing. And the wisdom that does or doesn't follow in its wake. In those moments where you're sensing the urge in your chest that you want to yell at your kid. You want to, look at something that's not something that would be good for you to be looking at. You know that there's something you need to do, a conversation you need to have, and you just turn away from it. But instead of being condemning of yourself, just pay attention to what you're sensing and how you're making sense of that and what you're doing in response, and being curious about it instead of being condemning. And hopefully that's going to be the next step in this progression of becoming people of wisdom.
I love that, Kurt. Yeah. Thank you. I'll report in.
Right on.
Yeah.
I will too.
And thanks for the time jumpers, making me aware of that. I was not aware of that was happening. And it's really, really amazing stuff. And I just love the collaboration that they have with one another, and communication that, you can't really see necessarily or hear. I mean, you can hear it in the music, obviously, but knowing what to do next and knowing how to work with one another in those situations is beautiful. So thank you.
Right on.
All right. Until next time.
Till next time, brother.
Yeah. And if you are watching on the YouTube channel, stick around because Amy's going to be joining us here in just a second. Love you, Kurt.
All right, man. Love you too.
Okay, Aim, what you think?
Hey, Aim.
What was the name of that book?
Oh, gosh. I couldn't get it. I mean, it's Tom, Dick, and Jane.
There we
book.
go.
Yes.
I should have jumped in.
Yeah. Yeah. It is not Harry, Dick, and Jane.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not. And
that's a different book.
Yes. And my inner
Altogether.
12-year-old couldn't get beyond it after those words came out of my mouth. So I missed a quarter of the podcast. So
Harry, Dick, and Jane was banned in the school district I was part of.
It should have been.
It wasn't banned in my school, but
okay.
Part of my problem.
Let's progress the conversation to another level. Amy, what you think about today?
Okay, was it an oboe? An oboe?
That he plays?
Yeah. Not a piccolo.
No, it is a
okay, I thought I had it.
It's basically
not a recorder.
It looks like a recorder, but it's called
like a slide whistle.
It's a whistle. Whistle is one of the names. Whistle is one of the names. Why can't I think of it? Okay, so I will say this real quick. So last week, so two things. I can send you guys the clip. Last week we recorded "Happy Birthday" for Phyllis when we were at this men's retreat, and we decide how are we going to do this. And Andy Gullhorn is going to film it. Jeff is he is a bit of a savant when it comes to his instruments. And I pick around on the piano a little bit, but I don't play the piano like Jeff plays the piano. So the way that we filmed it was that Jeff sat on there's this grand piano. Jeff sits on the ground. You can't see his head. His head barely comes to the top of the keyboard. And I sit on the bench, and Jeff cannot see the keyboard. He's playing the keyboard up here, and he plays Happy Birthday from up here while the film looks like I'm playing. Unbelievable.
See that.
That's
unbelievable.
Awesome.
Yeah, we got to see that.
He's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Very cool.
Anyway, we did lose 3 of his little whistles in the grand piano. Because if you know much about Steinways, they have the keyboard cover that just folds down, and when the keyboard was up, he had 3 of his these whistles sitting on top, and something caused him to pull the keyboard down, I pulled the cover down. The whistles dropped into where and then when he lifted it back up, the whistles slipped in and went into the piano.
Oh
where
my gosh.
where you can't get them unless you take the entire thing apart. And we can't get to them. And what does Jeff do? Jeff gets on his phone and he calls a friend of his in Arizona who basically is a Steinway repairman. I mean, that's my kind of unsophisticated way of saying it. And he builds his own pianos that are, worth over $250,000. And this guy is on FaceTime with Jeff, and he just unscrew that screw. You're just going to lift this thing up to, and there they were. But Jeff could just call this guy, and right then and there, and he answered him.
And you got the whistles.
Got him. Yeah.
I do want to see that video.
Yeah, I will.
Hilarious.
So what'd you think, Abe?
Oh my gosh. So I'm looking at my notes. We're on season 6. And so the culmination of all seasons, I forget which season were the 9 domains of integration a while back.
I think it was season 2.
2, yeah.
I think so.
It's all of that is building to now it's season 6. Because I think, okay, it's kind of swimming in my head, but so the endeavor of wisdom,
mm-hmm.
It's it's not at our cadence, right?
Mm-mm.
And I think, why isn't it at our cadence? And mm-hmm. I think it's primarily fear. There's this, and I was thinking about Pep, in our prep time, when Pep, you were talking about being in a meeting and you expressed gratitude for being in the meeting, and then they wanted your input, and you were like, I'm going to be clumsy. I might be clumsy about this. And you said you could feel, which is the right hemisphere, that just the room settle. And mm-hmm. I thought, okay, that is what's required for the endeavor of wisdom, for seeking mm-hmm. wisdom. Because mm-hmm. If we are on alert, if I'm on alert, if I am totally filled with fear, it is really hard to seek wisdom. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, so that settling in takes trust. And then, you were saying, Kurt, today, okay, you pick who you're going to trust. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's a diversion from the race or the
right.
And it's and then having the language, even language, what's when you walk into a room and it feels off, mm-hmm. and we have language that's the right hemisphere. Just to have that understanding, oh, look at that. That's what's happening.
Yeah. Well, Aim, you that example that you gave of your story, Pep, is really good, because I'm thinking so I mean, to your point, Aim, mm-hmm. Pep, you get in the meeting, and I mean, you know to some degree in advance that you're meeting with people that you don't know. You know mm-hmm. that in advance. But then you actually get there, and now you're with the people that you don't know, and you become embodied wisdom by naming what is true about the room. Mm-hmm. You name it, and you also and you do so in a way that is also really self-reflective. I might say these things, and I'm perceiving that it might come out clunky. It might come out because I'm thinking about these things as I'm saying them.
Right.
But you're naming what is true in the room. You're moving to incarnation. You're taking things out of imagination. You're making it possible such that the people who are in the room, they don't have to wonder what's going on in your head. Mm-hmm. And yeah, anytime somebody's saying something as they're thinking it comes out not as polished and as smooth. I mean, that's true for all of us. But for someone to be aware that that's the possibility and then name it as it happens, it's oh my gosh, that person who's just said that, if I'm in that audience, if I'm in that group of people and I'm listening to you, I'm that guy's thinking of me, even as he's talking about the stuff he's talking about.
Yeah.
And that is an integrative, creative process in and of itself. The very act of your naming those things as you did was an act of creation, was an act of creativity. And you're connecting your right and your left hemispheres. Not only that, but you're connecting the right and left hemispheres of other people in the room while you're doing that. And who, like, look, we're all going to have times when we walk into a room and we're tense. And maybe not even for bad reasons, but we're tense because we've got this thing, we don't know people. It's like going to a party that I don't know people. I'm a little anxious. But naming the things in the room the way that you sense is a way of, as you said, it just reduces the distress, and it then creates space for people, for other people to join in that creative, enterprise.
And it's so generous to do that. Like so many times that's ignored altogether. And it's like, oh my gosh, what a gift. Now I can settle in and actually hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the time jumpers, like I didn't know that they didn't know what they don't know what they're going to play.
Not always.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because, okay, so if we're known, like our whole thing is be known and create beauty. And that takes tremendous trust. And so when you have that trust, then you can create beauty, because like, if you don't know what you're going to play, which we don't know what we're going to play all day long, like most of the time, it's living, not static, like, and it's like, oh my gosh, okay, I have my community that I can trust. Even if I have my community that I can trust, then in different places, I can create beauty because I have that foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that, like, in many respects, it's not that we don't know anything about the other or about myself. It's not like the time jumpers have no idea about anything. Because, but they bring to the stage such a wealth of experience and practice, both in their own individual craftsmanship, but also playing together. There are things that they are confident about, but they're not certain.
Yeah.
They're not certain. And I was talking to Jeff last weekend, and he was just saying how when these folks get together, one of the things that you notice is that as you're playing together, and as we get to the point where we're gonna, like, okay, we're gonna toss it now to the drummer to have some individual, like, solo time, or to the accordionist, or to the guitar, or whatever. He said it's almost. He said you'd think that that your best playing happens when, like, you're the one who's doing the solo work. He said, as it turns out, some of your best playing is when you are doing everything you can to make the current soloist sound as good as they can possibly sound. Because, like, you're working really hard to, like, everybody's paying attention. So how can we help, whoever, whether it's the vocalist or, like, do their, like, we're dialed in. And I think about that, kind of, that wisdom is this process of being attuned to these things that are happening in this horizontal domain. And of course, there's going to be other things. We're going to pay attention to other things as well as time goes on. But again, this gets back to the whole notion, as we've talked about Scripture being this thing that we just are immersing ourselves in repeatedly, over and over and over, and revisiting this over and over. And this is like, the time jumpers are people, Jeff, I mean, he's in his 60s. And he would say, like, I'm practicing now as much as I've ever practiced.
Oh my gosh.
Practicing now as much as I've ever practiced. And this is a guy who sits down and plays absolutely anything he wants to play. Anything you wanted to play, he'll play. Wow. He says, we're listening, and he said, somebody will play a note, and he says, oh yeah, that's an A, that's a G, that's a whatever. Like, he's just, but it's not just because he's, got this magical gift. I mean, it's years of intentional attunement. Like, wisdom is something that we have to practice becoming. It doesn't just land on us.
Yeah. It's very cool.
Good.
Yeah.
You thinking, Pep?
I was just thinking about that, the time jumpers, and the closest thing that I can even um, think of as an experience of what they're experiencing is just sort of like some improvisation stuff that I've done with people
Mm,
that are really good, and you know that
mm,
you're safe in their hands, and
mm,
you're playing off of one another, and you're giving enough space to one another, and it's
hmm
just this um, unvocalized communication that's going on, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
exciting when it hits right, you know. But it does. You have to be. You're starting with something when you walk in the room.
hmm
You have to
You know,
bring
you aren't
something.
coming.
You
Yeah,
don't
you aren't coming in
show up empty-handed.
as someone that's never done this before, or hasn't been doing hasn't been practicing and doing all the work,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
that you can bring it to the group and um, let it happen. And
Right.
there's a sort of element, a feeling of I've already done all the work, and so now you can let go. And in that
hmm
Mhm.
freedom of letting go is when some of the
hmm
best stuff happens. When
Yeah.
you're not so concerned about technically what you're doing and all of those things. And but the only way you can get there is if you're like Jeff, and you're in the room, and you're practicing, and you're practicing, and you're practicing, so that when you are actually performing, there's no thought
It's all
of it
there.
anymore.
Right.
Yeah, it's all
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny in these confessional communities that we run, we often have conversations in which, if people are about to, if people have a thing in their family of origin, or in a marriage, or in, some other part of their life that feels really overwhelming, and how I'm not quite sure how I'm going to like get through this next week with this particular situation or whatever. And, you know, or maybe it's coming up, and they've been working on this, and we say, look, to your point, Pepper, in many respects we're saying what we're really doing in here is we're practicing. This is real life. This is real life.
Yeah.
It used to
Mm-hmm.
be, and such that you are so practicing naming what you want. And by this I don't just mean like practicing, well, just role playing the conversation. I mean really doing the work of being aware internally. What's my right brain telling me? What am I sensing? And what am I now going to do? If I can pause, be aware of the linear lines of thought that are coming. What do I now want to do with what I'm sensing, imaging, and feeling? What do I want to do with that? And being in this space where people ask you that, what do you want to do? But we want you to pause first, right? We're going to move at God's pace. We're not going to move at your pace, the pace that you want to move at. We're going to move at God, be reflective. And that kind of practice, people will frequently come back and report after having had a hard conversation. They sound like, well, I've said that on our podcast before. They would say, yeah, I knew exactly where each of you was standing in the room.
Ah, mm-hmm.
And your presence enabled the whole thing to slow down for me. And I could do in that conversation what I do here. Right? And we would say this is what Trinitarian life is about. Jesus is doing on the earth what he sees his Father doing. When we immerse ourselves in that triune collection of Scripture, Spirit, body of Jesus, that becomes this hard deck on which we stand, in which we are okay to be, even in places that don't feel immediately okay. May have said this here before. John Wooden, the famous coach at UCLA, when back in the 70s, they were just winning championship after championship, their basketball team over and over again. It was a common comment that his players would say, "Oh, practices are far more difficult than the games are." And not because he was a harsh taskmaster, but because they're going to go over this over and over and over and over. And they're just going to do this, practice this over and over, working, and that's how we become people of wisdom. It requires that kind of serious engagement. And I'll just say this: I'm just really, I mean, one of the things I love about this, what we're doing here on this podcast, is that I know I'm with two people who are getting after it. I'm doing this with two people who are serious about the work, as we like to say. And and therefore, like, that it's hard, and we can be with each other in that process, becoming people of wisdom. So,
You know how you
so
were
grateful
saying
to be
that two people can be in the same situation and have a completely different concept of what's happening?
Yeah.
For me, I question my wisdom of being in the relationship with you guys in that.
Here we go. Here we go. I was on the edge of
Well,
my
okay,
seat. I'm like,
right.
this-
Well, can we just say, Pepper, that so do we?
Yes.
Question. Can we
Well, then
say?
maybe we have more in common than I
think
thought.
I don't. Yeah, I don't think this is one of the. I don't think this is a good
This
example.
isn't one of those moments.
No.
This isn't one of those. Shoot, I thought I was the only one.
yeah, no, yeah, you got
No,
it right.
I think we all feel very empathic about this, about you.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're all, Amy and I get it.
We're on.
Listen, it's been great spending time with some of you.
Oh my gosh. I can see Pep's hand on the end button. He's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, we have to stop this recording at some
land
point.
this.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
This is great. Thanks.
Good to hang
Thank
out.
you.
Till next time.
Till next time.
This podcast is produced by Kurt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.